Hey there, my name's Brandon Welch, and I'm 27 years old, and I'm from Washington State. And this is my video for YouTube about my primary sources. My first primary source is the Massachusetts Circular Letter of February 11th, 1768. And I chose this primary source because it's going to give my paper a lot of information about the beginnings of the grievances that the colonies had about the acts that were being passed by Parliament at this time. Um, it's going to cover a lot of information about how people in the American colonies really felt about the acts that were being passed during this time. This was just kind of like a newsletter that was passed around that lots of people got to read and got their hands on. So it kind of sparked a little bit of outrage and brought the colonies together in terms of all the grievances that were being held against Parliament at that time. My second primary source is the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress, and that was in 1774. This source I chose because it is the direct workings of the First Continental Congress, and that's going to show that what the colonies were thinking at the beginning of the Revolution. It also shows that they all gathered together with the similar issues with Parliament, and it is actually the first account of some sort of unification within the colonies. Uh, the next one I'm going to use is it's an eyewitness narrative um, about the Battle of Bunker Hill. It's by Peter Thatcher, and it was written in 1775. This is going to show an eyewitness account from just a regular person who saw and witnessed the Battle of Bunker Hill. This was obviously a very big and important battle within the war. It's good for the reader of my paper to have an account from a regular person and not just a popular diplomat such as George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or the King of England or whatnot. But this is just actually a regular guy that witnessed and watched the Battle of Bunker Hill, and it really gives you a good account of just how bloody and violent that actual battle was. Um, my fourth primary source is Lord North's Conciliatory Resolution, which was written in February 1775. And this is a resolution that Lord North wrote, um, and it shows that Parliament countered the colonists' grievances, um, actually with something that they acknowledged uh, the problems that the Americans had at the time. So they understood that they were kind of upset with what was going on at the time. But this this was not accepted by the Americans, and but it does show that the British responded to the Americans, thus recognizing and acknowledging the problems they had. The source will give my paper, or will help my paper when I discuss Britain's point of view and how that side viewed the shaping of the war. My fifth and last primary source is actually the Americans' response to the prior Lord North conciliatory resolution. So this is what the Americans had to say about what Lord North wrote back to them. And this is the response. It's going to help my paper show that the British talked to the Americans, went out of their way kind of to respond and acknowledge. And although that Lord North conciliatory resolution wasn't passed, the Americans rejected it, but they did respond to the British conciliatory resolution. So it shows that there was actually quite a bit of dialogue going on. I mean, it takes months at a time to get from the Americans back to British or Britain or whatnot, but it does show that there is some dialogue going on at this time. and that's going to help my paper really show a lot of different sides and points of view when it comes to showing how the Revolutionary War affected so many people and thus became very revolutionary. My secondary source is actually a YouTube video. It's a kind of an introductory video that discuss a lot of the topics that I am going to cover, such as the Consolatory Resolution and the Battle of Bunker Hill. And yeah, this video is going to be on YouTube. It's titled The American Revolutionary War Part 1. And it'll give a good introductory points of view about a lot of stuff that was going on at this time. The second secondary source is the Revolutionary War and Reenactment Battle of Germantown 2015. So this is a war reenactment of the Battle of Germantown, and I watched the whole thing, and it just really gets pretty gory and just really shows how violent this war was. I'm going to discuss this video in my paper to show how bloody and violent the Revolutionary War was and how that aspect can sometimes be overlooked when it comes to all the other information and topics and aspects of the Revolutionary War. Not many people really remember or talk about how bloody and violent it was, and I want to discuss that in my paper. My last secondary source is actually, it's a journal. It's titled British Veterans of Two Wars, and it's in the Journal of the American Revolution, published in November 2015. This is a good article because it discusses what many British soldiers were going through during this time. It discusses how the British Army was kind of during a peacetime army, so for them to be kind of thrusted into this big revolutionary war was also tough on them, and for them to adapt and change their ways to get ready for such a big war. This paper really does a good job of showing both sides, not only the Americans, but also what the British were going through, British soldiers were going through during that time. The argument that I'm going to make in this paper will be that the Revolutionary War affected so many different groups of people from all over the Americas and Europe. And because it affected so many different groups from so many different countries and regions, it was therefore, in fact, very revolutionary. By using the sources I've discussed, I will show a lot of different perspectives from not only the British side, but also the American side. The resolutions and the responses between Lord North and the Americans will show dialogue between those in charge on both sides, and the videos and eyewitness accounts of battles and the reenactment video will show just how violent and bloody this war was from the common person during this time. By showing all these perspectives, I feel like my paper is going to give a very good view of how the Revolutionary War was, in fact, very revolutionary in terms of freedom and how it shaped the entire globe afterwards. So that's going to be my paper, and I hope you enjoy reading it. Take care, class.